Welcome, everyone. Let's jump into something really engaging, the prisoner's dilemma. It's like the perfect blend of strategy and human psychology to, you know, really show how decision making can get complicated.
Yeah, it's a fascinating example of how individual choices can lead to outcomes that are totally counterintuitive.
Exactly. At the core, we have a scenario where two players, often imagined as prisoners, must choose between cooperating or defecting, and each outcome has specific fixed
Right,
payoffs, which really sets the stage for all the assumptions behind it.
right. And that idea of fixed payoffs is crucial. It almost kind of forces the decision making into one simple binary structure: cooperate or defect.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you're handed a very clear set of options. But then there's this paradox. Even though the best overall outcome would come with mutual cooperation, each prisoner is pushed by self interest into defecting instead.
Yep,
And that paradox is what makes the whole thing so intriguing.
for sure. And then when you dive into the underlying assumptions, it adds so many layers. Like, one obvious assumption that really stands out is no communication between players.
Absolutely. Without any room to discuss or coordinate, each player is left in a sort of isolation. And that highlights exactly why you end up with distrust. Each one is nervous about being the only one to cooperate.
Speaking of distrust, it's interesting how the problem assumes there's no trust between players. Even if they could talk, there's no guarantee of sincere cooperation.
Right, that's a good point. Even if communication were possible, the assumption is that trust is so fragile here that it wouldn't really change the calculated risk of
Absolutely.
defecting. The risk of betrayal overshadows any potential for trust.
And that ties really nicely into the idea of individual rationality, the idea that each prisoner acts totally in their own self interest to minimize their own sentence, right?
Exactly. Individual rationality is the engine that drives the decision making here. Each player analyzes the situation and picks the option that, based solely on personal outcomes, seems the best. It's fascinating because even though both could be better off cooperating, the lure of an even better individual outcome by defecting is too strong.
Right. But isn't that a bit short sighted? I mean, if they could somehow see the bigger picture, wouldn't cooperation actually be smarter?
That's where collective rationality should ideally come in. If both players acted for the collective good, they'd both choose cooperation. But the twist, the very essence of the dilemma, is that individual rationality trumps collective rationality every time.
True. Now, speaking of outcomes, we've also got that fixed payoff structure. Each of the decisions, whether it's mutual cooperation, unilateral defection, or mutual defection, has its own concrete outcome.
Yeah, it's like each outcome is carved in stone. And because defecting always seems to offer a better personal result regardless of the other's move, it becomes almost a dominant strategy.
Yep. It's kind of a powerful setup because it shows exactly how our personal incentives can sometimes lead us to poorer overall results.
Totally. And one of the interesting assumptions is the idea that the interaction is one shot. There's no room for learning, retaliation, or building trust over time. That single encounter really solidifies the dilemma.
Right? Because if it were repeated, then things like reputation or future punishment could, make cooperation more viable.
Exactly. That's why in the iterated prisoner's dilemma, strategies change significantly. But in this classic one shot version, the players can't alter their behavior based on past actions.
And another key assumption is symmetry. Both players are treated equally, they have like the exact same choices and payoffs. That really makes it a fair game in a theoretical sense.
Yeah, that symmetry ensures that neither player has an inherent advantage. It makes the analysis pure, focusing wholly on the decision making process without external bias.
Right. There's also the non coercive environment aspect. It's all voluntary. No one is forced by an external authority to either cooperate or defect.
Yeah, that's a major point. It's solely up to the player's choices, which really highlights the internal conflict between self interest and mutual benefit.
Something I sometimes wonder is whether this model, despite its lab like setup, truly mirrors real life decision making. I mean, in real life, are we really so purely self interested?
That's a great point and one we're often challenged on. The assumptions clearly state that self interest over altruism is the norm here. But in reality, human behavior can be messier, with emotions and ethical considerations. That said,
True.
the model works perfectly to expose the tension between what's best for one versus what's best for all.
And then there's the assumption regarding mutual knowledge. Both players know the rules, the payoffs, and all the potential outcomes, which is essential for the whole strategic calculation.
Right, both parties are fully aware of the consequences of each decision. This mutual knowledge is critical because it removes any uncertainty about what each action might bring, focusing solely on the strategic dilemma itself.
Yep. It's almost like the game forces you into a very rigid frame of thinking. You know exactly what the terms are, and then your real-life human nature steps in with emotions and fear.
Yeah, it's like a perfect storm of logic versus emotion. And to add, another assumption is the binary nature of choices. There are only two options, which really simplifies the analysis, but also overlooks more nuanced real-world decisions.
Exactly. And while that simplification is what makes the model so elegantly analyzed in game theory, it can be a bit limiting when we try to apply it to complex real-world scenarios.
Right, I mean, in many situations, there can be more than just the two choices. But the binary setup definitely helps in dissecting the fundamental principles at play.
Absolutely. And then there's the idea that there's no external enforcement, no third party, no legal system that could enforce cooperation or penalize defection.
Correct. That absence of an external mechanism means the player's decisions are totally in their own hands, amplifying the inherent conflict.
Yep.
It really isolates the strategic tension to just the players and their personal calculations.
So, summing it up, we have a model where players must choose in isolation, trust is basically non-existent, and self-interest drives decisions even when a collectively better outcome is possible.
Exactly. And it's really a neat mirror to many situations in economics, political science, and even evolutionary biology. It's like a blueprint for understanding why cooperation can be
Right.
so hard to achieve.
I get that, but I'm still a bit skeptical about how universally applicable this really is. I mean, humans interact in a lot more dynamic ways outside of these neat binary choices, don't you think?
That's a fair challenge. The model definitely has its limitations. It's an abstraction that doesn't capture every angle of real human behavior, but its strength lies in highlighting the tension between individual incentives and collective outcomes.
True. Yeah, it's like a theoretical sandbox that helps us understand, in a simplified context, why defection might seem individually rational even when it's globally suboptimal.
Exactly. And that has far reaching implications, whether it's negotiating treaties between nations or managing competitive business environments. This tension is pretty universal.
And it's also a reminder that sometimes, if we could just, allow for communication or build some trust, then cooperation might actually be more achievable.
Absolutely, and that's why in many modern adaptations or repeated versions of the game, introducing communication and trust can dramatically change the dynamics. It throws open a door to strategies like tit for tat, which can foster long term collaboration.
Right. It's really interesting how such a seemingly simple setup can yield so much depth in understanding strategic behavior.
For sure. The prisoner's dilemma, with all its assumptions, from fixed payoffs to one shot interactions, remains a powerful tool in dissecting the conflict between individual and collective rationality. And even though we note its limitations, it continues to serve as a fundamental model in game theory
Yeah.
and beyond.